Hi and welcome, Kevin Carpenter. Today, our guest in the interview for the conference. Kevin, what are you up to with C++ right now?
So I work in credit card transactions. So if you're, as the example I give, because we don't do Europe, if you're in the US, you swipe your credit card, that machine talks to software, and then I talk to the networks. So today I'm actually working on a project that is handling financial output from a database. So transactions come in, they get stored, and then we end up processing them. And so pulling data from a database, doing some processing on it, asking credit card networks if a payment's been settled or whatnot, and then storing it back in the database. That's my project today, and updating stuff to move from CentOS to Ubuntu. But yeah.
Sounds so a lot of working with financial data and just pulling from databases.
I mean, it's not all from databases. So we run, we're what they call an acquirer. So I work with a lot of CPP HTTP lib, which we use to host, and a JSON interface for a RESTful interface for taking credit card transactions. I've given a talk before on that, and so when it comes to credit cards, there's kind of two parts of it. We have the part where someone swipes a credit card, and we have to be very responsive, end to end. 20 seconds sounds like a long time, but when you're talking from the point that someone swipes their credit card, we have all these little jumps that have to happen and back out. And if anything fails, you have to be atomic. And then the other half, which was the program I'm working on today, is, at the end of the day or at the end of the week, a merchant settles. All those transactions come in, and it's kind of that thing where you're looking at your credit card statement or credit card back, and it goes from pending to settled. Mm-hmm. And so we either have the process of, having to be very concurrent with processing transactions as they come in, but then at the end of the day or something, now you're in a parallel situation because you're processing 200,000-300,000 transactions, and they have to be done within 5-10 minutes, because you're trying to make a bank transfer happen or something like that. And all of our backend stack is Linux, C++. We've had a few programs that we convert from Windows, but the goal's been moving it all to Linux and C++, and we're about 90% of the way there.
Sounds like an interesting job you have.
I've done financial analysis on credit unions, so risk management, doing interest rate risks, and that was interesting just because there you're processing a lot of data with simulations, you're forecasting out, and so you have a different kind of a processing load. The thing I think I like about the job I have now is I'm not at that level of. On one way, I'm not at that level of a transaction of being at a Bloomberg. It's not like a trading or high frequency trading where, but then also just that very real part of, in my own way, helping everybody buy food every day or buy gas. I mean, small things to help the world.
You're part of the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So one of those little wheels which better keeps turning.
Yep, exactly.
So that makes me wonder about your talk, and you give a talk about mastering memory management in C++ with custom allocators. How does that play into your day-to-day life? Is it like that you're interested in this, or is it actually relevant for your job?
So it's kind of both. The thing that's interesting about this talk is, so when I submit this talk, I kind of put it down as an intermediate talk, and I don't make an advanced talk because generally when I'm writing C++ code, I'm using modern tools. I'm not, like I said, I don't have this nanosecond type performance that I always have to hit, when we're doing things, in a concurrent fashion. Our performance ends up becoming a bigger thing. Like I said, if I'm doing settlement, if I'm processing 100,000 transactions and I need to do it within a certain amount of time. But the way the talk came about is I was editing a book on memory management for someone who's much more skilled in it. Patrice Roy, and as I started to learn about it, it just became one of those things where it started down this rabbit hole of I'd always kind of understood cache lines and why we want to use them that way, but then it just got me down this learning process of what we can end up doing to improve efficiency and pull that extra, in my case 15% sometimes, out of the way that we were managing keeping a massive amount of transactions in memory as they were waiting to pull through and be processed. So one of the things I did a talk at CPPCon that was about almost always vector, and the thing that I always find interesting when I was comparing memory usage, vector, we don't have to think too much about it. All the allocations and deallocations happens on the back end, but it is kind of interesting because Alistair, there's a talk on YouTube, I think it was from CPPCon 2018, but they actually took a PMR, memory resource using like the monotonic buffer, and you could turn around and get that almost stack efficiency in memory, but using a PMR memory resource. And so, it's just been interesting researching those kinds of items. And so that's what the talk is about. The learnings that I've had over the last 6 months, it wasn't something that we absolutely needed at the time, but as with most projects, as things scale up, the time that you do need it, you're already out of time. And so you better have the solution ready.
Yeah. And that sounds like a good takeaway from your talk, right? I've also looked a little bit into PMR, and it seems to be kind of sometimes interesting to see like the effects of it, and especially when you can avoid the heap allocation and just basically have the memory ready.
Yeah.
That can be a big help in a lot of situations when you're out of time. But
yeah, so that, and to that part, so that's the thing, when with the talk, I want to kind of go down that portion of, it'll definitely cover some of the basics, like padding and things like that, which can end up playing a role with how memory gets laid out and getting those little bits of access speed, but then finishing off with how we can use a custom allocator to gain some efficiency, and then I'll try to give the examples using I like using my Visa card or credit card data structures just because very relevant to my daily life.
Yeah, so when we talk about performance, how much of your performance is influenced by external factors? Like when you can optimize your own code as much as you want, but when the database is like taking its time, that might eat just the performance you just gained, right?
Yeah, it does. So, like I was saying, we kind of work with both sides. If I'm working with something on the authorization side, there's so much network latency and such in that portion that I don't get to worry about. It's not that I don't get to worry about. Making gains in that is definitely hard in comparison to when we do our settlement, is when we're really working the parallel processing. And there's actually times where we'll turn around and, instead of selecting from the database for a specific card brand, say just Visa or just MasterCard, we'll actually select across, a time period where we're getting all brands. And then we'll actually do the performance handling inside the C++, where then I'm actually, splitting out and filtering my data inside my app instead of the database just for that reason. So there are times where we actually find more efficiency by processing the data structure inside C++ versus letting Oracle do the query out.
And do you do a lot of multi-threading? Like, do you have a dedicated thread for the database access and then do the...
Yeah, we use a dedicated thread for the database access, and then we'll run multiple threads, generally per network. So, especially if in the case that I was just talking about, if I've pulled out a chunk of transactions, then, one thread is pulling data from the database, actually using intermediaries. We use a caching or different, kind of like a database proxy from a security point of view. But then, we will fire up multiple threads for the different networks if I'm processing that way. And in that case, the threading goes, maybe I might have 3 working for Visa, but maybe only 1 for Discover, because Discover is a smaller data source. We're not going to have as many of those transactions versus Visa transactions. And then, of course, we can scale it up based upon the hardware that we're running on.
Yeah, it sounds like there's often very interesting solutions you have to find to, do all the processing. And
it's fun for me as a job because, like I said, we get both sides. When you're looking at small businesses like restaurants and such, here in the US especially, and I say it that way because I always love when I'm visiting Germany and Europe because they come to your table with a card reader, and we do that a lot more now. But in the US, it's still that thing of they do the authorization, but they don't close out the tabs until the end of the night. And what's funny is, as a small business, everybody wants to get their money the next day because they're trying to, keep their business going. So it's been a few years, but that was a very real problem for a while. When we merged with another company, they brought on, something like 15,000 new merchants, which included restaurants. And so suddenly at 10 o'clock at night, when all these restaurants are closing, you now suddenly have another 10,000 restaurants that are sending in their transactions. And you have only an hour and a half window with which to process all the transactions because you're literally sending out ACH requests so that it'll move the money, from one bank back into the merchant's account so that they have it the next day. And, nobody likes not getting paid. So, yeah, but it definitely makes for some fun challenges in the work environment.
Yeah, I remember once in my life I've been in a similar, not like on your end. I was code reviewing and mentoring someone for a company which had their own shops, and they had their own software which was running on their counters when they processed sales.
Yep.
And part of that was a credit card terminal, and they used some library and stuff. And I was just at some day asking why is and this the person who wrote the application wasn't available anymore, and they were not originally doing C++. So it was, on the one hand, an application that was kind of cleanly written, but more like, and I think that person originally did SAP programming. So it was C++, it was cute, and I could read it, I could understand it. It was in parts very complex. In other parts, it was like, you read this payment function and you use a raw new on the terminal, and you get that terminal connection, you do the processing, and it seemed to be mostly that you basically created this terminal object, called it, gave it over to that, and then basically it would do its thing on the terminal. And interestingly, that was a raw new, and every time they called that function, they would allocate a new object to that. And I had no idea what they were using there, and it wasn't documented. And I was like, it's kind of difficult, but it seems a bit shady to me to every time to allocate the object.
Yeah.
And then I was like, let's make the bold move. We'll make that a smart pointer and see what happens. And so we made that a smart pointer, and I think a month later or something, I get the feedback from them that, hey, we don't know which changes you made, but we don't have to restart our terminals or the software like once a day. The software was always freezing, and the payment wasn't working anymore. And then always, they explicitly told me that the end user is like people without technical knowledge. So their technical solution to everything was to reboot or to restart the application. And they were very happy that they hadn't to do that like every time. There was less time eaten by that. And just makes me think about all the code I saw as a freelancer.
it's kind of interesting because, the amount that, with modern C++, it's not like we have to use raw news that much anymore. But uh, it is interesting how you miss one, you start getting memory leaks, and you get that instability. The thing that's kind of interesting on terminals is, the terminal is meant to be that box that even from a point, so your point of sale software will run on whatever machine you're on, and it makes that request to the terminal. But then it's really a nice security feature because the terminal is in a way locked out. You make the request to the terminal is secured inside, all the encryption and everything goes back and forth, and the terminal just responds back to the POS. Yes, it was approved. No, it was declined. Here was the amount. And so, we've seen it. Our original, I started with this company going on 8 years ago, and we had a lot of stuff that was barely C++ 03, some 98. And so it was interesting to go through and work to clean up code and slowly modernize stuff. I was happy to start using unique pointers over new and delete. That was for sure.
Yeah, that's always a good move. And so I've heard that you're involved with CPPCon, and that's been like a month, but it's like 5 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
So just wanted to ask you, like, what's your experience with CPPCon?
So CPPCon, I've only missed one CPPCon. In 2017, I started volunteering there. And so up until last year, I was volunteer coordinator. This year, I worked as speaker liaison, which was really kind of nice because when you work as a volunteer coordinator, I mean, you run your conference. It's not like you get to enjoy much of it when you're running all of it, right? And even with volunteers, you get a lot of people helping out, but there's all the different moving pieces. So doing speaker liaison was kind of nice this year because I actually got to go see talks. It wasn't, making sure badges were getting handed out and everybody was in the right rooms. And so, but it's, CPPCon's coming back. It's like we all kind of took the hit in COVID. And so, each year it's been getting a little bit more back to the size that it was. And so I think the conference went great. I would love to see trainings get back. It seems like training has changed since COVID hit. Online stuff seems to be doing well. I want to say like Nikolai had done a class online. He, and even Andreas Furtish, when he does his online classes, they seem to fill up well. But then let's be honest. I mean, going to the Gaylord for a class, it's like if you're already coming to the conference, that's one thing, but it's not an inexpensive place to stay. So
that's true. I've been there once, and I mean, regarding trainings, yes, Nikolai is also giving a training at my conference, but we just moved it after the conference, 2 weeks after the conference, and it's purely virtual.
Yeah.
Also, like from a conference perspective, renting the room makes the training itself so much more expensive.
Yep.
And you're not sure how many people are coming, and so I so far have always been of the opinion that it's better to do that online, and with the pandemic that option finally became available. And yeah, it's like with Meeting C++, we have a tool where actually every volunteer and staff member can choose which talk they want to be host or co-host. And that's basically it. And then they assign themselves and go there. And it has worked wonderfully.
It is interesting because like CPPCon is so I helped Phil Nash out, right, with CPP on C and ACCU. And there I think it's a little bit more like, we normally run it with about 9 or 10 volunteers. It doesn't seem to take a lot. And And it works really well. Same way you say, I just have them sign up. They tell me what talk they want to see. We get everybody scheduled, and those actually run pretty efficiently. CPPCon, when you have 35 volunteers, and I think the thing that also makes CPPCon a little bit more from the volunteer part is they run a store, and the store is, there's 30 plus products, right? It's not, they always have the shirts that they give away, but then there's bobbleheads and keychains. And, we had these really cool C++ charging pads this year, so you could set your phone on it. And it is really kind of cool, stuff, but that does give a whole another area that, you have a group of volunteers for that are working shifts. And so that definitely adds a level of complexity to it. But it is also kind of fun just to see everybody coming around, picking up merchandise, or like when we sell books and then do book signings, that's been fun. But otherwise, I agree that, when we're just talking the conference, volunteering is, and it's always cool. I don't know about you, but it's kind of nice to get, the volunteers you get in some students or people that are new to the conference scene, and they're trying to get, and it's really nice to foster that.
Yes.
Connection, right?
That's one of the reasons I decided to take in volunteers again in this year. We didn't have volunteers in the last two conferences because basically my staff, we just have 3 tracks and my staff is enough to run that.
Yeah.
And now that we stream the sessions, I took away that responsibility of recording from my staff and professionalize that, so they are even less needed, but still needed in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So that aspect of conferencing has become easier. But then, of course, I also need to have new people become staff in the future. So the best source for that is having volunteers, and also just have additional folks on the team which can learn and then return in different roles. Some of them actually become speakers.
Yep.
Last year we had one speaker from Greek, and she gave a great talk, and I didn't realize, but she was a volunteer in 2018. And so the big topic I saw from CPPCon, because there's no online part, unlike my conference, is like the new standard C++ 26 and reflection. Yep. How did that feel for you when you were on site?
So it's interesting because, I myself am, so I used reflection a few times back in my .NET days. So, and I've seen multiple talks on reflection, but I've not gotten into it enough myself to really know how I will make that be put to use in my day-to-day job. That said, there was a lot of buzz. Everybody was super excited about David's talk for reflection, and reflection overall was definitely the hallway track conversation you would hear people talking about. So I think I know that there's a lot of excitement for it to come out into the standard. That's for sure.
Yeah, I kind of see that. We do have a talk about reflections on the conference too. And I think I hope that they really get a good portion of it into 26.
Yeah.
And that adoption doesn't take too long, and that we don't get into conflicts between compiler vendors. And so I'm kind of looking forward to it, but I also kind of, it's a feature that is so long away to be actually usable.
Yeah.
Users, I think.
It makes me think of executors.
Yeah, that's coming along now. That's in 26, at least already in the standard.
Yeah. Well, and so I say it that way because I remember when it was first coming out, it was everybody's big push. And I know that I believe Microsoft has executors working pretty well, if you're using Visual Studio. But then on the Linux side, I believe we have to use, TBB from Intel in order to, really get it. And so when I think of reflection, it just kind of makes me think of that same thing. It got into the standard, but to your point about getting the compilers on board and such,
But that's like with schedulers and senders receivers, you can use the library and you're fine.
Yes.
because it's not a language part, but reflection completely is language defined. And I'm very excited what we can do with it. It's definitely having the introspection added to the standard, and then also doing pattern matching on top of that.
Right.
That's for me a really interesting approach to basically have a new mechanism in the language, and then say we can do reflection with it, but also we can use it for pattern matching, and who knows what we want to do with that. So I'm looking really forward to that, but I do have to wonder, with C++ 20 being basically now available today, 4 years after release, how many more years we have to wait for that actually to become reality.
For the compilers to actually catch up with the actual standard. Yeah. No, that, I guess it's one of those things like which big which big company, Bloomberg, Nvidia, someone really wants the feature, and they'll start throwing resources at it. At least that's my hope.
And when you work on the credit card industry, how are you affected by the US government regulations about safety and security?
So, we're PCI, so payment card industry, we have what they call the PCI standard. And being the fact that we're a credit card processor, we have to follow PCI standards. Now, what's interesting about PCI is it's not actually government regulation. PCI is actually a requirement by Visa, MasterCard, and all the payment card networks. But if you don't meet the payment card network standards, then you don't get to be a processor, right? You end up losing.
Is this similar to MISRA?
I think, yes, I would say it is.
It's an industry standard, and you have like a certification or checking tool that tells you can do this, that. Well, that's interesting. I never heard about that standard and is it like explicit about C++ also, or?
No, it's not. It's not explicit about C++. It's explicit about, encryption, the cryptography you're going to use, the way you're going to secure things, whether or not you're using two-factor. And it gets to some real generic stuff too, like, okay, you have to rotate your logs every so many days. You have to review your logs every so many days. So it's very encompassing as a security standard. And PCI, the MasterCard, Visa, and all the card brands, so in the US, we have like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which was an actual, set of regulations or laws enacted by the government, which then changes how the card networks respond to things, which then gets passed down into the PCI compliance, So not specific to Gramm-Leach-Bliley, but it's one of those things where, suddenly you were doing trainings every 6 months and now you're doing them every 3 months. You do your audits more frequently or things along that nature. I will say the one thing about being in this business that's interesting is the amount of, I like, I've spent my time at DEF CON, which is the hacker conference that they have in Vegas. And so I know both sides of the coin, if you will. And it is interesting, the fact of the amount of attacks that we see, the amount of phishing attempts that I get specifically against my accounts or things, even from personal. And it's just a constant thing that you live with. But because of PCI, then, our process for putting things into production, our process for testing, the review process that we have, it definitely gets layered. We have our very technical points. But then it's also, sorry, got a text from the wife and I put do not disturb on, but, she breaks through. So with PCI, it is definitely one of those things where, we'll, within our team, do our own code reviews, but then, even once we get ready to push to production, now our code will go through, several levels of static analysis. That's just the security group, trying to find errors, trying to find buffer overflows, trying to find some place that you're doing something wrong. Now, they don't, they're using more tools to do that. They have some knowledge experts, but it primarily is tools. And so from a safety and security, we definitely feel it. Now, I will say that even with our company, after the the White House had put out their paper last year, the company is looking more at Rust. And so, we have started looking at and training and learning some more Rust. And as I've learned it, it's interesting to see how the borrow checker that they use in the compiler is just very stringent. And it does make me think about code differently. But I don't, personally, I don't think, if you're using modern C++, the memory items that we get pointed to, yeah, you still have to be smart and you have to be careful. But I think we have a lot of older code that is more susceptible to issues than stuff that we're writing with modern C++ now. That's my long-winded 2 cents.
I think, yeah, that's true. And the interview with Titus Winters last week brought up the topic, and he's actually in the road group planning partly for Adobe how to react to those regulations and what part of the code they have to rewrite or implement in a safe language. And he was very explicit about that C++ for them seems not to be a safe language, and that on the other hand, I know that we have standards like MISRA, etc., where you have your code being checked, and then that's the industry standard. And it's also going to be industry standard for a while, but it's going to be interesting how this evolves and how the industry reacts to the whole new landscape which we see with Rust and other languages. And maybe also C++ or parts of C++ becoming memory safe.
Yeah. I sometimes like to joke, I'm like, they used to have that joke when I was younger that COBOL programmers be retired on the beach making all their money because, and I kind of think the same thing when we go to the C++. There's always going to be enough older code going that, until AI can write good code, we should be all employed for a bit.
I think the same, that we probably will have some AI companion to help us understand the code we're supposed to maintain in the future. But I also do think that C++ still has a lot of things going for it, and I am hopeful that maybe we can reach some people in the committee to see that we actually also move forward with security. And say for 26.
I do think that, the security point, like I said, having seen the other side of that business, there's a lot that we do when we're writing code to keep things secure, but it's also that same thing, like whether you make an API or you make an interface or you make an app, there's the way that you thought about using it. And, we try to put guardrails so that your data can't get squashed or somebody can't, you minimize the attack surface as much as you want, but I just think it's human. The ingenuity and the way that we think about things isn't always the way that they get designed, and I don't think a lot of that's necessarily C++'s fault either. It's I think design plays, an important part in that, because even there for us with what we do in credit cards, the security comes in layers, right? There's you might be encrypting your payload, but then that is then still going to be ran over an encrypted line, which is probably encrypted 2 or 3 times, a couple different certificates. Things are compartmentalized so that they're running in their own memory space so that one app can't read into another app's memory. And that's, you do your best when you're writing your code to not have, a for loop or create a memory exception that can then be used in a load situation from someone passing in a bad packet. But I think there's a lot more to the scenario of security than just what C++ does.
Oh yeah, I think that's true. And I also think that your industry probably, has had their fair share of security incidents, hardening things and making, from the start, that an important issue. While in other industries, that is just starting. So
yeah, logging in every day is about a 15-minute.
You're well better prepared than other industries.
Yeah, I was going to say logging in every day is about a 15-minute process with way too much two-factor. But then none of us wants to be the person that got, our machine got broken into and so credit cards got leaked or something. Nobody wants to be that person. So I'll take whatever security they want to throw at me.
Yeah, and then I guess all your code goes through an audit before it's like being deployed.
Yeah, and there's multiple layers there too, because in general we work on development machines and that's it. They mirror a lot of what our production is, but then there's a whole nother layer that does the quality assurance testing, then a whole nother layer after that does security testing, and one person that writes code can have no access to production boxes, so you can't get the Office Space instance where someone
that'd be nice. That'd be such a nice vector to have, somebody who
yeah.
You don't want to be the person doing that. That's makes your target so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably also for you nice to work in an industry that is such regulated and has so much safeguards in place and makes things easy.
It is interesting because like the safeguards, your security group aren't developers. And so there is that time where you get a little frustrated because you're jumping through 5 hoops just to edit a file. Or, it's not possible to be doing a lookup on a web browser at the same time you're connected to a particular VPN because things are, they're broken off for a reason. But to that end, it's like, the risks are too high, you
always can have multiple machines, right? You have like one machine for doing your web searches and reading CPU reference.
Yep.
And the other machine for doing the coding. But I know that can be frustrating. I have worked with similar setups where I worked for years at Vodafone, and one of my freedoms was that I had a laptop, and on that laptop I could do what I wanted.
Yep.
Admin rights, and on my normal office laptop I was basically an office person where I could do things and write emails, but often on the projects I worked it was sometimes easier just to do it on the other one, and then transfer things with USB stick. And then things changed with myself running Meeting C++ now for 12 years. So I'm looking very much forward to see you. I think you're for the first time in Berlin, right, at my conference?
No, actually, this is my second time. My first time was last year, and I have to say I was super excited to come back because, because the conference was awesome. So the hotel where you have it it's a beautiful place, and so I'm really excited to come back.
Well, then I can easily ask you, what was your experience like?
So I feel fortunate, like, my family was, my mom's side of my family's all from Germany. And so coming to Berlin is, it just really warms my heart in general from that point. Love the city. But the hotel, it's right there off the train line. And so to be able to go see other things while you're there is easy. But the hotel itself is just, the facilities are beautiful. Lunches and breakfast were nice, and the people were it was great to see so many people from different countries, so with me helping at CPP on C and CPP Con, I definitely see a lot of the same speakers or whatnot, but I think with where you're located, you get a lot more people that are from Europe overall. It's like CPP on C, we get a good amount that come over from, France and Germany and Belgium. But it was just a great conference overall. So excited to come back.
Well, looking forward to see you again. And there's going to be a lot of people which are the first time on the conference this year with the committee, and looking very much forward. And I plan to give them actually a little bit of space on the conference that the committee can, mingle out and have their own sessions there. And
that worked out really well. Just how I don't know how the planning went, but that the committee is going to be there the week after, right? Is the committee meeting, or the week before?
Yeah, by coincidence. I'm happy that worked out. I'm very happy that it's like really nice. And so a lot of committee members are traveling through Berlin.
That's
and then
cool. That should
taking
make
the
for a great hallway track.
Oh, yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks for your time. It was really interesting to talk to you about C++ and all the related issues.
I appreciate the time, Jens. I look forward to seeing you in just a little more than a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks
Yeah.
and the conference has started. So
Yep.
I better get going. So
more slides to work on. Thanks again.
yes.
Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.
Auf Wiedersehen.